An accident forced Jiang Ning to marry as an Empress dowager in the capacity of a prime minister. On the night of her wedding, she hugged the emperor's thigh and, with tears streaming down her face, wanted to speak up for herself. Unexpectedly, the emperor only regarded her as a crazy woman talking nonsense and threw her into the cold palace. In order to survive, Jiang Ning preached, set up stalls, farmed, managed, and gained fame in the cold palace. Everyone. I want to achieve great success. Jiang Ning. Find me. Everyone. I want delicacies from all over the country. Jiang Ning. Find me. Emperor. I want the people to be peaceful. Jiang Ning. Find me. Jiang Ning earned a lot of money in the cold palace and is world-renowned. Emperor. Stay, I am willing to do everything for you. Jiang Ning. Let's pull it down, I have plenty of money. The plot goes down to the downfall of a wealthy career, criticizing the straight female lead versus the arrogant emperor's love-brain male lead keywords of the novel. After being forced to remarry, I became a sensation in the cold palace without a pop-up window. After being forced to remarry, I became a sensation in the cold palace. Download the complete text. After being forced to remarry, I became a sensation in the cold palace. Read the latest chapter. Chapter 1. How brave you are. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. How brave you are. In the early morning, deep within the imperial city, in the cold palace. Under the cover of thin mist, the courtyard of the cold palace is full of vitality. The vegetables that were just planted a month ago have already sprouted and formed a green patch of varying shades in the yard. In the vegetable field, Jiang Ning, dressed in plain clothes, pulled out the last grass from the field, barely propped up his waist, and looked at everything in the cold palace with a smile on his face. This is her first month in the cold palace. A month ago, this cold palace was still eerie and desolate, but now it has presented a vibrant scene. Madam, I have already picked it. Today, I will stir-fry vegetables for you. On the other side of the vegetable field, a 16 or 17-year-old girl was holding a handful of vegetables and smiling as she shouted to Jiang Ning. The girl's name is Zhiliu, and she is the only personal servant of Jiang Ning. Since Jiang Ning entered the palace, Zhiliu has been by her side and also accompanied her into the cold palace, struggling to survive. At this moment, Zhiliu was wearing a goose-yellow skirt and a simple bun. Her face, without any makeup, was slightly flushed by the morning frost, adding a touch of playfulness. Jiang Ning was in a daze for a moment, and a picture came to her mind of a young girl holding a plump mouse and kneeling in front of her with green eyes, crying about their poor life in the cold palace these days, which had depleted her years of savings and could only wait for death. She smiled slightly, and no matter where she was, life was finally getting better. In the blink of an eye, Zhiliu had already arrived in front of her. She skillfully selected the vegetables on her hand and looked towards the direction of the palace gate with some concern. Madam, can we really have meat to eat? Jiang Ning pulled the broken willow to the eaves and casually brought 2 boards to sit down, continuing to choose dishes. I think there shouldn't be any problem. This small matter can still be trusted by Lu Feng, he said. Despite what Jiang Ning said, the unease on Zhiliu's face still lingered for a moment. The man named Lu Feng was the deputy commander of the Imperial Guard and also a good friend of Zhiliu in the palace. Since Jiang Ning's master and servant entered, they have received a lot of help from Lu Feng, and it is thanks to this relationship that Jiang Ning has been able to live so happily in the cold palace, but I still. Just as Zhiliu was speaking halfway, the cold palace door was pushed open with a small crack. Lu Feng poked a sneaky head through the crack in the door, looked left and right, then pushed open the door and ran in with a big object in his arms. Empress. I found it for you. Lu Feng said, but he ran 2 steps to Zhiliu and held the things in his arms in front of her like a treasure. The master and servant lowered their heads and saw Lu Feng holding a strange bird with a pointed green feather in his hand. What is this? Lu Feng scratched his hair and chuckled, I don't know either. I saw this outside the imperial kitchen. I saw this chicken with shiny feathers appearing in such a place again. It must be some rare delicacy. Jiang Ning looked at the emerald green long feathers at the tail of the strange bird, which were bright in color and adorned with eye-shaped textures of different sizes, making it look like a rare thing. She took the strange bird and shook her head helplessly. This bird doesn't have much meat on its body. It would be a pity if it were eaten now. Jiang Ning casually pointed to an uncultivated open space in the courtyard. Let's raise it first, and it's not too late to eat it when it's fattened. As soon as the words fell, Lu Feng was about to set off to make a chicken coop around the ground. Wait a moment. Jiang Ning tilted her head and looked at the chicken, inexplicably seeing a hint of fear in its eyes. You have caught this chicken, I have important uses for this feather. Lu Feng nodded vigorously, and Jiang Ning immediately put down the vegetables in his hand and began to pluck the feathers from the chicken tail. Throughout the process, the strange rooster screamed incessantly, and the broken willow couldn't bear to look straight at it, causing Jiang Ning to tremble with fear. It took a lot of effort to finally pull out a few of them. The strange bird with its tail feathers plucked lay in the hands of Lu Feng, making a hoarse sound in its mouth, on the brink of death. Lu Feng built a chicken coop in the courtyard and raised the strange chicken, while Jiang Ning instructed Zhou to find some jewelry-making tools and start tinkering with the few chicken feathers. In the next few days, Zhou went to feed the strange chicken every day, and used up all the strange chicken food. The strange chicken just didn't eat or drink. Until the third day, the strange chicken was already as thin as a stick, on the brink of death. Helpless, Jiang Ning had no choice but to bring in Lu Feng to prepare for killing chicken and stewing soup. The three of them set up an iron pot to boil water, and brought bowls and machetes. Lu Feng held the strange chicken trembling in one hand and a machete in the other, and swallowed a mouthful of saliva with a hint of unease. When I cut it down later, you stay away from me to avoid blood splashing on you, he said. The master and servant nodded earnestly. The strange chicken had a look of helplessness on its face, clearly giving up resistance. Okay. Lu Feng gritted his teeth and raised the kitchen knife high in his hand. The master and servant turned their heads with a heavy expression, and the strange chicken calmly closed its eyes. Suddenly, a commotion came from the door, and a muffled sound came. The palace door was knocked open, and several people dressed in guard costumes stormed into the cold palace. The leading man glanced at Lu Feng with a hint of surprise on his face, then lowered his face and waved his hand behind him, surround me all. Lu Feng took 2 steps forward and protected the master and servant behind him. Vice General Chen, I don't know if you are. I am ordered by the emperor to come and search for the missing beloved pet of the Empress Dowager. Jiang Ning smiled and waved her hand, misunderstanding. Oh my, it's all a misunderstanding. Where do we get our beloved pets from here? Vice General Chen reached out and took the dying strange chicken from Lu Feng's hand, carefully holding it in his hand. Madam, this is the beloved beauty of the Empress Dowager, he said without waiting for everyone to react. Vice General Chen looked around at the machetes and iron pot on his side and said, even if you bring a knife, take it with you. 3 people from Jiang Ning were escorted to a palace. Vice General Chen, holding the captured strange chicken and knife, approached to explain what he had seen and heard in the cold palace. Zhou trembled all over and asked in a low voice, Madam, what should we do? Jiang Ning remained silent, only slightly looking up and looking at the 3 people sitting in front of him. Girl, tell me who are currently in power in this palace. Zhou twitched her nose, barely calming herself down. The most esteemed person in this palace now is naturally your husband, who is the current Holy One, Mu Jingzhao. Jiang Ning's gaze turned and slowly fell on the man sitting in the center of the hall, dressed in a dragon robe. The man was listening to Vice General Chen's report with a furrowed brow, while looking contemptuously at Jiang Ning. It's like looking at every penny of cabbage on the street. This face evoked some unpleasant memories in Jiang Ning, and she turned away with a casual smile. Stop looking at him. The emperor has just ascended the throne, and there are not many concubines in the palace. With you, there are only 3 concubines in total. The Empress is the daughter of the Minister of Revenue, with a gentle and pure personality. The Empress is the legitimate daughter of General Liu, with a sharp and straightforward personality, and is known as the world's most beautiful woman. Before Jiang Ning could match her words with someone, her thoughts were interrupted by a scolding. The matter has come to an end. The person has taken the stolen goods and obtained them. What else do you have to say? Jiang Ning looked up and saw the beautiful woman in red staring at her with hatred on her face. The dying monster bird was convulsing and lying in the arms of the beauty. The beautiful and unparalleled Empress Dowager caressed with a loving expression on her face, tears streaming down her face in an instant. Her delicate body tilted and leaned into Mu Jingzhao's arms. Your Majesty, you must make the decision for my concubine. This peacock was specially gifted to me by you. I have been taking great care of it and taking good care of it. Unexpectedly. I didn't expect it to be kidnapped by a traitor. Consort Ning dared to disturb you in just one day of entering the palace, but now she is still restless after being sent to the cold palace. If she doesn't receive a heavy punishment, she will suffer endlessly. Mu Jingzhao glanced sideways at Jiang Ning and said, Consort Ning, what do you have to say? Jiang Ning immediately leaned down, tears streaming down her face. Your Majesty, I am wrongly accused. I am just living in a cold palace, facing hardship. That day, I happened to catch a glimpse of this strange chicken standing outside the cold palace, thinking that I could finally get some meat and fish. Without waiting for Mu Jingzhao to speak, Lu Jinfu's sharp voice rang out again, life is difficult. I see that you have been deceiving people in the palace every day, but you have earned a lot of money. What Lu Jinfu said was about Jiang Ning being forced to speak and make money in the cold palace due to her desperate situation. In order to make his story sound vivid and convoluted, Jiang Ning fabricated many of his own and Mu Jingzhao's tumultuous and bizarre love stories. The act of harming beloved pets is one of them, deceiving others and insulting the emperor is the other. Lu Jinfu's eyes swept and slowly landed on Lu Feng beside the folded willow. She curled her lips and smiled, collaborating with the guards to privately give and receive is the third. Concubine Ning, you are so bold. Jiang Ning's heart was beating incessantly. I have a hard time. Can you tell me what your difficulties are? Emperor. Your Majesty. As soon as Lu Feng's words were spoken, they were interrupted by the broken willow, while Jiang Ning took a step faster and knelt before Lu Jinfu. Actually, I have admired the Empress Dowager for a long time. Jiang Ning uttered a sentence, and the surroundings instantly fell into a dead silence. I have heard for a long time that Empress Dowager Guifei has a beautiful appearance and is the most beautiful woman in the world. That day, I saw the peacock standing at the entrance of the cold palace, with smooth and shiny tail feathers, and thought of making a rare treasure to give to Empress Dowager Guifei. Jiang Ning took out the peacock feather hairpin that had just been made yesterday from her arms and handed it to Lu Jinfu. Madam, I made it myself. Lu Jinfu hesitated and forgot Jiang Ning's glance, then took the hairpin from Jiang Ning's hand and glanced at it, his expression softened a lot. Just as Jiang Ning breathed a sigh of relief, don't think that if you say that, our palace will forgive you. Concubine Ning has just arrived and doesn't understand the rules. Your Highness, please don't lose your composure for just a beast. The Empress said it lightly, if it's not your pet, you naturally won't feel sorry. There are still many peacocks in my palace. If the noble concubine likes them, I can give you all of them as gifts. Lu Jinfu refused to let go and turned to look at Mu Jingzhao, Your Majesty. Please, Emperor, for the sake of Empress Ning's mother's family, give her a horse. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Cooperative Relationships. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Cooperative Relationships. The Queen's words seem to trigger a specific memory mechanism. Everyone in the hall looked at the petite girl kneeling inside with a hint of awe in their eyes. Yes, no matter what, she is always the legitimate daughter of the Prime Minister Jiang Qingyuan's family. Even if the emperor sees Jiang Qingyuan as somewhat disrespectful, he dare not do anything to her. Mu Jingzhao coughed lightly twice and said, "The Empress is absolutely right. It's normal for Consort Ning to not understand the rules when she first arrived. If we were to be harshly scolded, it would appear that we are a bit unreasonable." He turned to look at Lu Jinfu and smiled apologetically, reaching out to shake her shoulder. "I'm also very sad about what happened to Jin Xiu. After that, I will definitely double compensate you, okay?" Having finished speaking, Lu Jinfu didn't want to continue the commotion, so she had to twitch her shoulders slightly and nod. "Alright, everyone, please step back." The people around began to disperse, and Jiang Ning heard the sound and pulled a broken willow to prepare to leave. "Concubine Ning, you stay." Mu Jingzhao took Jiang Ning to a side hall and dismissed the servants, instructing Jiang Ning to close the doors and windows. In the tightly closed room, Jiang Ning and Mu Jingzhao silently confronted each other. The curling light smoke kept rising from the nearby incense burner, dissipating in the air and being sucked into her nose. This was originally a fragrance used by the nobles in the palace to soothe and nourish the mind, but at this moment, this fragrance not only did not make Jiang Ning feel any peace, but also stirred up some unpleasant memories for her. Perhaps seeing her lose focus, Mu Jingzhao took a step forward and lightly patted her shoulder. Unexpectedly, Jiang Ning bounced away like a startled bird. "Don't worry, I came to talk to you today about something urgent." Jiang Ning looked at him with lingering fear in her eyes, but despite this, she still found a square stool far away from Mu Jingzhao and sat down. "What's up?" Seeing her reaction, Mu Jingzhao didn't say much and sat down with her. Mu Jingzhao lightly tapped on the table and said, "I won't say much nonsense anymore. I hope we can cooperate." Collaboration. A heavy inhalation sounded in the air. Simply put, "I hope you can kill me." Jiang Ning looked up and caught Mu Jingzhao's slightly uneasy eyes off guard. Inexplicably, she thought of her identity as the daughter of the Prime Minister and felt a bit more confident in her heart. So, Jiang Ning sincerely offered his advice to Mu Jingzhao, "If you're sick, go see the imperial physician." Mu Jingzhao remained silent, just staring at her expressionlessly. Inexplicably, Jiang Ning felt a surge of imperial aura surging towards her like a tide. Jiang Ning's feet softened and he slid down from his chair, kneeling in front of Mu Jingzhao. If a villain knows his mistake, he should die 1,000 times. Jiang Ning lay on the ground, nodding like pounding garlic. Seeing her like this, Mu Jingzhao's gaze softened slightly. "Do you still remember what you said to me on your wedding night?" The trembling girl's body trembled like a chicken cub, and she hesitated to look up. "The emperor believes what the villain says." Mu Jingzhao remained noncommittal. With a family like the Jiang family, it's impossible for a daughter to kill chickens, farm land, or twist hairpins. He paused slightly, got up, and walked towards Jiang Ning. "I listen to the books you say in the cold palace every day." A clearly defined face suddenly approached Jiang Ning, and at that moment, she seemed to forget how to breathe. Fragmented fragments flashed alternately in Jiang Ning's mind. "I am with the emperor, but we grew up together as childhood sweethearts. When the emperor saw me first, he argued and demanded that I be his wife. That year, during the Lantern Festival of the Yuan dynasty, with thousands of miles of red lights, I climbed up the city wall at a young age and accidentally fell. It was the emperor who, fearless of life and death, used his body as a shield to protect me in his arms. At that moment, I was determined not to marry him. That year, when I was young, I almost burned the kitchen to make soup for the emperor's hands. The emperor ate a whole table of burnt food without changing his color, but his eyes turned red when he saw the burn on my hand. The blasphemy she used to make in front of the palace people rushed towards Jiang Ning, causing her to feel dizzy and confused. She seemed to understand what it meant to bring disaster out of her mouth. As Mu Jingzhao's face approached, Jiang Ning suddenly understood everything in her heart. This so-called cooperation is nothing more than the emperor wanting her to pay the price for this previously unintentional offense. She looked at Mu Jingzhao's face getting closer and closer, trembling almost to the point of tears. I know I'm wrong with the emperor, and I dare not arrange for the emperor without authorization anymore, she said. Mu Jingzhao didn't speak, just squatted down not far from her. He looked at Jiang Ning and put his hand in his arms. Jiang Ning trembled and retreated, his eyes wide open in fear. Did he want to kill someone and silence him? She protected her head with both hands and struggled to shrink into a ball, but the expected knife did not fall on her. With some hesitation, Jiang Ning opened his eyes and saw a large golden ingot lying peacefully in Mu Jingzhao's open palm. The scenes where the story takes place in your words mostly take place in the folk. As far as I know, Jiang Qingyuan's daughter doesn't step outside the main gate. If we only rely on fiction, it is impossible to create such a vivid scene. Jiang Ning seemed to never listen to Mu Jingzhao's words again, staring intently at the sparkling golden ingot in Mu Jingzhao's hand. I have sent someone to investigate everything you said later, and it is indeed true. Mu Jingzhao looked at him with great interest, his palms suddenly closed, as if he had grasped the entire fate of Jiang Ning. I know everything about you. A month ago, in the imperial capital, at an inconspicuous corner of North Street. Dozens of residents of different ages and clothes are sitting on neatly arranged low benches, holding melon seeds and tea, staring intently at the corner of the wall. In the depths of the crowd, Jiang Ning, a girl dressed in plain hemp clothes, cleared her throat and spoke nervously to the crowd. I saw the thief holding a long spear and making a loud shout. The spear was aimed directly at the female general's door, and the spear head pierced through the air, making a sharp sound. A gust of air swept through the air, causing the female general's hair to fly. Everyone instantly held their breath, even the old man at the end of the crowd, who was most eager to eat melon seeds, twisted the empty melon seed shells on his hands and held his breath. However, the gunfire suddenly stopped just an inch before the female general's forehead. The thief was shocked and looked up at the female general, only to see. Everyone instantly widened their eyes and stretched their necks to look in the direction of Jiang Ning. But Jiang Ning, at this moment, quietly closed her mouth, picked up the tea at hand and took a big sip, then stopped talking. What did you see? The girl in the front row stood up angrily, took out a copper coin, and threw it into the bamboo plate in front of Jiang Ning. As the protests continued to sound, the audience in their seats stood up and reluctantly took out copper coins and placed them in the bamboo tray in front of Jiang Ning. What did you see? Good girl, just tell me a little bit about the rest, just a little bit. As the wailing continued to sound, the emotions of the crowd became increasingly passionate and indignant. Even worse, he grabbed Jiang Ning's clothes and began to plead. However, even so, Jiang Ning only smiled faintly and resolutely fell behind. Ignoring the sighing audience, Jiang Ning happily packed up and prepared to leave. Tomorrow at the same time, I will meet you all here again. Jiang Ning carefully packed the silver, moved his sore limbs, waved his hand to the audience, and walked towards the alley behind him. Jiang Ning walks in the alley with her bulging purse. At this time, she usually goes to a wonton stall deep in the alley to eat hot wonton. As the night approached, a small patch of the sky in the alley began to become rich in color, and the aroma of food from somewhere filled the entire alley. Occasionally, a few scattered street vendors hurriedly passed by carrying poles. Jiang Ning walked quickly towards the corner with a joyful expression on her face. Just as she turned the corner, she heard a muffled sound coming from the back of her head, and then she lost consciousness. She doesn't know how long she fell asleep. When she woke up again, the dull pain on her head had not completely dissipated. After a moment of dizziness, Jiang Ning instinctively raised her hand and wanted to rub the dull and painful back of her head, but suddenly realized that her hands and feet could not move. The scorching pain embedded in her wrist, and Jiang Ning lowered her head to see that her hands and feet were tightly bound by the thin hemp rope of her fingers. To be precise, her whole body was tightly tied with hemp rope. Jiang Ning struggled for a moment and found that there was no room for the rope to loosen. She opened her mouth and wanted to call, only to find that her mouth was tightly covered with burlap. Jiang Ning took a deep breath and worked hard to calm her mind. Quickly, she accepted the fact that she had been kidnapped. But what Jiang Ning couldn't figure out was that she was just a small commoner on the street who relied on storytelling to survive. She had no money, no power, no color, and no appearance. The person who kidnapped her went through so much trouble, but what was the reason behind it? She lowered her head, trying to adjust her breathing, and suddenly realized that she had just been too flustered, completely unaware of the unusual nature of the kidnapping. Although there was a cloth blocking her view, she could vaguely tell from the subtle light emanating from the fabric that it was a red cloth. And what she was wearing at this moment was a meticulously embroidered red wedding dress. The ground under my feet swayed unsteadily, and the cheers and swona sounds in my ears were incessant. Jiang Ning suddenly shook, and she suddenly realized that she was on a sedan chair. She is in the procession of being sent off. She carefully combed through her memories before the coma, hoping to find some clues. However, no matter how much she recalled, she could not find any information related to the kidnapping. Helpless, Jiang Ning suddenly tilted her body and fell to the side. Despite this, the cover on her head was still firmly fixed on her head, revealing only a slight red glow. Just as Jiang Ning was lying in a sedan chair at a loss, the sedan chair gradually stopped and landed. The curtain of the sedan chair was slowly lifted. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Empress Fei gains power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Empress Fei gains power. The red cap obstructed Jiang Ning's line of sight. Looking through the gap in the red cloth, she could only see the red cloth shoes embroidered with golden chrysanthemums slowly approaching her. The red cloth shoes were not far in front of Jiang Ning. Oh, it's okay. The girl just accidentally fell asleep and leaned down and hit her head. Jiang Ning judged from her voice that the person coming was probably an old lady. The old lady reached out to help her up and said, "The girl is having a tantrum with me. I'll calm her down." Jiang Ning was startled and trembled all over, struggling to break free from the constraints of the old lady. The old lady's hand, which was supporting Jiang Ning's arm, suddenly tightened. The piercing pain from her skin and flesh made Jiang Ning wince his teeth, but unfortunately her mouth was covered in rags and could only make a few sounds. Just as she was struggling hard, a cold light flashed and a snow-white dagger pressed against Jiang Ning's neck. "If I were you, I would be honest." The old lady's tone was heavy, causing Jiang Ning's body to shiver. "You're in my hands now. Be sensible, I can save your life. Do you understand?" Jiang Ning nodded incessantly, and the old lady turned around and left the sedan chair. The farewell procession continued forward, and for an unknown amount of time, it gradually transitioned from bustling crowds to tranquility. After an unknown amount of time, the sedan chair finally landed. The old lady freed Jiang Ning from her constraints and helped her out of the sedan chair, walking a long way. Along the way, the old lady talked a lot to Jiang Ning. The rough idea is to give her 50,000 taels of silver and assassinate tonight's groom. If Jiang Ning is unwilling, it will be a dead end. Jiang Ning has no choice but to respond first and then come up with countermeasures in the future. The old lady seemed very satisfied with Jiang Ning's performance and handed her a dagger to another young maid. Jiang Ning covered her head and didn't know where she was. After being threatened by the old lady, she no longer dared to act recklessly. Therefore, she was obediently taken into the bridal chamber. She stayed alone in her bridal chamber for a long time, surrounded by silence, with only the flickering shadows of candles swaying at her feet. After an unknown amount of time, she heard the piercing cry of, "The emperor has arrived," outside the door, and suddenly realized that she had been sent to the palace. And what I want to marry is the current Holy One. The door was pushed open with a creaking sound, and heavy and soothing footsteps sounded in the open room. Jiang Ning understood that the target to be assassinated tonight was approaching her. Fortunately, the other party didn't say much to her and directly lifted her veil. She looked at the meticulously embroidered golden dragon pattern on the other person's body, almost to the point where tears welled up in her eyes. She couldn't even imagine that in this world, besides the emperor, who could preside over justice for her. The urgency in her heart made her temporarily forget her fear, and she instinctively wanted to grab the other person's collar and tell her story. Helpless for a long time of binding, Jiang Ning was already weak in all four limbs. She just stepped forward and fell to the emperor's feet. Without hesitation, Jiang Ning hugged the emperor. Mu Jingzhao's thigh. Despite Mu Jingzhao's struggles, Jiang Ning hugged his thigh and told him about his experiences in the past few days. Deeply in love, Jiang Ning held the dagger that the old lady had given her, crying bitterly to ensure her loyalty to the emperor. Then, she was thrown out of the palace by Mu Jingzhao as a raving madman. Subsequently, the unlucky maid Zhiliu, whom she had never met before, was also thrown out of the palace. The master and servant were sent to the cold palace without stopping. At first, Jiang Ning was relatively happy and relaxed in the cold palace. She originally preached outside the palace, working from 9 to 5, regardless of weather. She finally had some free time to slack off, so she begged for it and lay flat every day, just thinking it was a long vacation in vain. Anyway, the palace is not worried about food and drink, and the conditions are good. Until one day, the desperate Zhiliu held a mouse and almost swallowed it alive in front of Jiang Ning. Jiang Ning suddenly realized that her comfortable life in the cold palace was earned through the selfless sacrifice of the willow. She suddenly felt a little guilty. After all, the broken willow could be considered as being implicated by her. So she decided to return to her old job and support herself and the willow through her own hands. But being in the cold palace, he always had difficulty moving, so Jiang Ning asked the good friend of Zhiliu, Lu Feng, to find a way to attract the palace people to this place. And she and Zhiliu dug a big hole in the corner of the cold palace and began to speak to the palace people outside the hole. Jiang Ning pondered and felt that the most talked about topic among people today was the gossip of the palace masters, especially the recent incident of her being sent to the cold palace. So, she told the ups and downs of her love story with Mu Jingzhao to everyone, causing countless palace people to cry in the corner. Jiang Ning earned a fortune through storytelling and successfully convinced everyone that she had a memorable past with Mu Jingzhao. The reason why she was in the cold palace was because there were unspeakable misunderstandings and grievances. She walked out of the cold palace and became a beloved concubine. It was only a matter of time. Even though the palace people had doubts about the convoluted and bizarre stories in Jiang Ning's mouth, these doubts quickly dissipated. All the irrationality became reasonable under the identity of Jiang Ning as the legitimate daughter of the prime minister. So, everyone was very willing to give Jiang Ning a favor along the way. After all, if she gains power, is promoted, and soars to fame, it's just around the corner. If she doesn't gain power, there won't be any losses. So, Jiang Ning survived in the cold palace like this. At this moment, in the Frost Blossom Palace, Jiang Ning looked at Mu Jingzhao in front of her in disbelief, and in the end, she surrendered under the unshakable imperial power. What does the emperor want the villain to do? Kill me, Mu Jingzhao said with a smile on his lips that outlined his victory without hesitation. He stuffed the golden ingot into Jiang Ning's hand. Isn't that thief buying my life with 50,000 taels of silver? He immediately stood up and said, then I'll buy my life back with 100,000 taels of gold. Jiang Ning was a bit stunned, staring at the heavy golden ingot in her hand. For the first time in her life, she felt worried about the future of this country. It seemed that Mu Jingzhao had finally realized his own slip of tongue, so he stopped and sat down again. Little person. Jiang Ning opened her mouth, intending to ask if she had any choice. As he spoke, he felt a bit redundant and said, "What does the emperor want the villain to do?" Upon hearing her question, Mu Jingzhao sat up straight and said in a straight voice, "Just follow your original plan to assassinate me." Jiang Ning originally wanted to argue that it was not his own or someone else's plan, but his words were choked back. "No matter what method or means you use, I will only give you 5 chances." He raised his chin and looked down at her. "If you succeed, I will give you the promised reward. If you fail..." The latter half of the sentence was swallowed by Mu Jingzhao, and it goes without saying that Jiang Ning could roughly guess what it was. The first time, it's on the 15th of this month. What if the villain is caught as an assassin? I will pardon you for not being guilty. What if the villain successfully assassinates? I will leave a testament to fulfill the promise. Jiang Ning pondered for a moment, but still didn't ask any practical questions. The two of them silently confronted each other in this palace. Finally, Mu Jingzhao spoke slowly and said, "Do you have anything else you want to ask?" Jiang Ning gritted her teeth and knelt straight. "I have one more thing to ask for." "What's up?" She looked at Mu Jingzhao with a calm voice and said, "After everything is done, the emperor can give the villain freedom." Mu Jingzhao seemed completely unaware that she would say such a sentence. He stared at Jiang Ning in amazement for a long time, but finally nodded slowly. "Emperor Xie." She solemnly kowtowed to Mu Jingzhao and then stood up to bid farewell. "If there's nothing else, I'll bid farewell first," she said. "Change your self-identification." Jiang Ning paused at his feet and said, "I'm leaving." She thought for a moment and said, "Can I continue my storytelling?" "Sure." Mu Jingzhao's voice was soft, "Put my image in a more positive light." She nodded and closed the door for Mu Jingzhao. Jiang Ning played with the golden ingot in his hand and walked towards the cold palace in the sunset. If she remembers correctly, it was the same weather on the day she was kidnapped. If Jiang Ning really wanted to take Mu Jingzhao's life, why would he choose her to marry instead of the Prime Minister Qianjin? "I was originally just a storyteller on the street, weak and lacking in talent and appearance, and had nothing to do with the Prime Minister's office. Why, despite having millions of better options to complete this arduous task, is it her?" Jiang Ning had not yet arrived at the cold palace when he saw a group of palace attendants surrounded by a dark and magnificent wall corner. A green-clad palace maid saw her and exclaimed crisply, "Empress Ning is back." The crowd turned around to look at her, with curious or concerned glances coming from her. However, Jiang Ning couldn't care too much anymore. There were so many complicated things happening today that she was completely disoriented. She just wanted to fall asleep and didn't care about anything else. So she weakly waved her hand to the crowd and said, "I'm a bit tired today, so I won't talk anymore. Thank you all for waiting. Tomorrow, I will talk for half an hour more." However, the crowd not only did not disperse due to her words, but the surprise in their eyes grew deeper and deeper. Jiang Ning was puzzled and turned to look in the direction of the crowd. At the corner of the long street, a red-nosed old eunuch was running towards her, panting heavily. Seeing Jiang Ning turn his head, the old eunuch was overjoyed and waved at him, "Madam. You walked a little too fast, I followed you all the way, but I didn't catch up." The old eunuch ran to Jiang Ning and stopped. He smiled obsequiously and said, "Madam, you have finally overcome your difficulties." After speaking, he cleared his throat, stopped his waist, pulled out a scroll from his arms, slowly unfolded it, and raised his voice in a sharp and piercing voice, saying, "We are blessed by heaven, the emperor declares." Jiang Ning knelt down at the sound, and the palace attendants behind him coincidentally knelt down. Concubine Ning, Jiang Shi, was of good conduct and virtue, and was granted permission to restore her position and title as a concubine. She moved out of the cold palace and to the Mingyue Tower. Later, the old eunuch read out a pile of scattered rewards, but Jiang Ning didn't listen much either. In the end, Jiang Ning kowtowed but did not take the order. He just looked up and said, "Could you please speak to the emperor?" This palace is unwilling to move. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Ideal Life. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Ideal Life. To Jiang Ning's surprise, the father-in-law gave a clear smile and said, "The emperor has already told the old servant about this matter. If the empress likes it, it's okay to live here." At this point, Jiang Ning had nothing to say, so she took the imperial decree and watched as her father-in-law left. At the moment when Grandpa's figure left the corner of the palace attendants flocked to surround Jiang Ning tightly. "Madam, your good day has finally arrived. Don't forget your servant." "Madam, it's so uncomfortable to live in this cold palace." "Don't argue with the emperor, forgive him." "Madam, will you continue to talk in the future?" "Empress." The swarming palace attendants almost squeezed Jiang Ning out of breath. Her body was already delicate, and being squeezed like this was almost completely submerged. Give way, don't squeeze our mother anymore." Jiang Ning heard the sound and looked around. Although it was a broken willow that made a shout, in reality, the person who pushed aside the crowd and walked towards her was Lu Feng. With his long arm extended, Lu Feng reluctantly opened up a small space for Jiang Ning in the palace. Zhou walked out from behind him, took the reward from Jiang Ning's hand, and escorted the two into the cold palace. The broken willow held Jiang Ning's arm, with a bright smile. As the sunset set, the warm orange sunlight fell on her fleshy face, making it look like a ripe orange. "Madam, I have been convinced since the day I followed you that I must not have followed the wrong person." The broken willow bounced forward, causing Jiang Ning's arms to sway left and right, making him feel as if he would always follow her light steps and float into the clouds. "Now, our vegetable garden has also been opened up, and the poultry industry will soon emerge." Zhou looked at everything in the cold palace with an undisguised pride in her eyes. Lu Feng led the two of them to the entrance of the palace and said with a smile on his face, "We're here." Zhou looked up at him in the sunset, and her voice seemed to be intoxicated by the dusk. "If I could live like this for a lifetime, it would be great," she said. Jiang Ning didn't answer. She looked up and saw a sparrow leaping from the corner of the eaves, flapping its wings and diving into the sunset. On the other side, in the heart-nourishing hall, Mu Jingzhao looked around and repeatedly confirmed that there was no one inside. He quickly grabbed a jujube from the glass bowl at hand and stuffed it into his mouth. He chewed on the sweet dates in his mouth with satisfaction, and his originally indifferent and distant expression gradually unfolded in that little sweetness. A jujube entered his abdomen, and Mu Jingzhao still licked his mouth with satisfaction. He then rolled up his sleeves and reached out his hand towards the glass bowl. Right here, a narrow gap was pushed open at the entrance of the heart-nourishing hall, and the sound of opening the door was so light that it could be almost ignored. Upon hearing the sound, Mu Jingzhao looked up and saw a black figure flash into the heart-nourishing hall, approaching Mu Jingzhao. Mu Jingzhao's hand trembled as the sweet dates rolled down to the ground. The person who came was the commander of the guards, Lin Zheng. Lin Zheng came to Mu Jingzhao and respectfully saluted him, saying, "See the emperor." Lin Zheng. Mu Jingzhao looked up at the man in black in front of him and let out a heavy breath. "I've told you so many times that next time you enter my palace, make some noise in advance and don't appear suddenly." After finishing a sentence, Mu Jingzhao lifted his chin towards Lin Zheng. Lin Zheng pursed his lips and stood up straight, without responding directly to Mu Jingzhao. He just lowered his head and focused his gaze on the sweet jujube at his feet. "The emperor is stealing sweets again." Mu Jingzhao turned his face away and didn't look at him. He coughed twice, wanting to cover it up. "How's the matter I asked you to investigate? Based on the clues provided by the emperor, I have found the whereabouts of the old lady on the night of our wedding." Such a sentence instantly made Mu Jingzhao sit up straight. "How about it?" "The old lady was hanged in a forest in the southern suburbs of the city. When I found her, she had been dead for a long time. Upon examining her body, I found no clues." "Hanging. Laughing to death, to be precise, it was the illusion of being strangled to death and being hanged, with an ordinary hemp rope causing her death. On her feet, she was still wearing the red cloth shoes embroidered with golden chrysanthemums, as the Empress had said. Is there any clue to finding the killer? No, there are few people coming and going in that forest. Besides, there was a lot of rain a few days ago, and even if there was any evidence, it had already been washed away by the rain. With the conversation between the two, Mu Jingzhao's expression became increasingly solemn. He reached out and twisted his furrowed brow, but he didn't say a word for a long time. So, what about the Prime Minister's office? I waited near the entrance of the Prime Minister's mansion for a full 10 days. During these 10 days, there was no abnormality in the Prime Minister's mansion, and the people inside the mansion decorated with lights and decorations, beaming with joy. Mu Jingzhao pondered for a moment and said, I remember, was that old lady the dowry of Consort Ning's mother's family? Lin Jing did not answer. Could it be that the Prime Minister's office directed and performed such a play on their own? But after so much effort, what is the purpose behind it? Mu Jingzhao supported his forehead with a headache on his face. He instinctively reached out and grabbed a large handful of dates from the nearby glass bowl, stuffing them into his mouth, bulging his originally delicate and three-dimensional cheeks. He suddenly didn't realize it, chewing on the honey dates in his mouth with difficulty while muttering to himself vaguely. Lin Jing no longer spoke to disturb, but waited quietly on the side. Finally, Mu Jingzhao struggled to swallow the honey dates in his mouth for the next period. He waved his hand to Lin Jing and said, Go help me investigate the origin of concubine Ning. He tilted his head and pondered for a moment. I remember she said, she was an inconspicuous storyteller at the corner of North Street, so it should be easy to find. Yes. Lin Jing just responded and his body flashed out of the heart-nourishing hall. Jiang Ning still lives as usual, talking, farming, eating, and sleeping. Her days did not seem to have changed in the slightest due to Mu Jingzhao's sudden favor. Since that day, she has never seen Mu Jingzhao again, and her plans for that day were like a nonsensical dream. But life in the cold palace has really improved visibly. The chicken coop that Lufeng used to raise peacocks was already filled with chickens and ducks. Therefore, in addition to daily irrigation of farmland, Landwind also occasionally kills chickens and chops firewood. Sometimes when Jiang Ning looked at the scene of him and Zhuliu working alone and wiping their sweat, he couldn't help but understand Zhuliu's longing for life. One day, while folding willows to fetch water, Lu Feng threw his hoe and came to chat with Jiang Ning. Lu Feng grabbed his hair and blushed, Madam, I have something to ask you. Jiang Ning casually pulled a towel and handed it to him, continuing to knock on his melon seeds. You say. The sturdy man blushed and said, Do you still have that peacock feather hairpin? End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Getting Rich. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 6. Long-term considerations. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Long-term considerations. Even though Jiang Ning kept muttering about the easily obtainable 5,000 taels all the way, she still felt a bit scared when she truly walked to the entrance of the Frost Blossom Palace. The exquisitely carved wooden plaque at the entrance witnessed her near death just a few days ago. Now that she has set foot here again, she feels inexplicably moved. Jiang Ning looked at the plaque and sighed, thinking to herself, is this Frost Blossom Hall her Yen Luo Hall? Perhaps seeing her stop here, the eunuch at the door bent over and walked towards Jiang Ning, with a smile that was somewhat imperceptible to please her. Madam, why are you here to find the noble consort? She smiled awkwardly with a hint of guilt and waved her hand repeatedly, of course not. This palace is just passing by, just passing by. Jiang Ning walked forward pretending to be relaxed while looking unstoppably into the open door of the Frost Blossom Palace. At the entrance of the main hall hung a pure white veil, and it was impossible to see what was inside. Two exquisitely dressed palace maids stood at the entrance, as quiet as two humanoid sculptures. She did not see the shadow of Lu Jingfu, nor did she see the shadow of the peacock. Jiang Ning suddenly made a mistake. It seems that the size of the Frost Blossom Palace is at least 3 times that of the Cold Palace. How can one find the location of a peacock without being discovered, and then cleverly pluck a few feathers from its tail without being discovered? Perhaps seeing Jiang Ning's hesitant expression, the eunuch followed her with a pleasing smile, "Madam." Jiang Ning looked at the young eunuch for a long time, but he didn't match him with any palace attendant he remembered. But she still casually fabricated, "I see that you haven't been listening to my storytelling lately, and I'm wondering if you've encountered something urgent. I want to ask." Jiang Ning pursed her lips tightly and widened her eyes to observe the expression on the eunuch's face. The eunuch was taken aback for a moment, then showed a joyful expression on his face. He nodded and bowed to Jiang Ning. "It's hard to worry about the Empress." The eunuch scratched his hair, showing a hint of shyness. "Actually, I only went there twice. The Empress Dowager is very strict, and I dare not." Upon hearing such a sentence, she finally breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Seeing that you are not in any major trouble, my palace can rest assured." The eunuch smiled all over his face and said, "I can't believe there's anything wrong with me. I have food and drink in the Frost Blossom Palace, and the Empress Dowager has not mistreated me." Jiang Ning's eyes turned and her face showed a hint of anxiety. "I'm worried that the peacock incident might affect you." She glanced around and approached the eunuch with a serious expression, lowering her voice to the ear. "Last time, the Empress Dowager had such a big temper." The eunuch's palm lightly patted Jiang Ning's sleeve and said, "Madam, you can rest assured that the Empress Dowager did not get angry with the servants. Moreover, the Empress Dowager was extremely fond of the peacock feather hairpin you made." Upon hearing such a sentence, Jiang Ning's heart instantly gained a bit of confidence. If the Empress Dowager's love for the peacock feather hairpin was really like that of this eunuch and the broken willow, then the business of selling hairpins would not worry about making money. After all, who in this world hasn't fantasized about being given the title of the most beautiful woman in the world and marrying the son of a true dragon? Even if dreams cannot be realized, having such a psychological support is also good. Jiang Ning thought this way and bit her lower lip lightly. "This is a treasure sent to her door, don't waste it." "So," she said with a hesitant expression, "is that peacock named Jinxiu okay?" The eunuch lowered his eyes and sighed. After the peacock returned, he became depressed and eventually starved to death. Perhaps afraid that Jiang Ning would be upset, the eunuch changed his tone and said, "But the peacocks sent by the Empress are still being well nurtured in the backyard of the Frost Blossom Palace. The Empress doesn't need to worry about them." Jiang Ning was overjoyed, but she never expected that it would be so easy for her to find out the whereabouts of the peacock. She chatted with the eunuch a few more times, and then joyfully embarked on the path of searching for the peacock. Following the guidance of the eunuch, Jiang Ning circled to the back of the Frost Blossom Palace, which was adjacent to a bamboo forest in the imperial garden, but no trace of her was found. Jiang Ning walked through the narrow gap between the bamboo forest and the red wall, which was only 3 feet wide, and struggled to move forward. She carefully bent over, using her arms to gradually remove the bamboo leaves. However, it was inevitable that the wild growth of the bamboo leaves would scratch her delicate face, causing a burning pain in her cheeks. She walked all the way, carefully listening with her ears against the red wall. Finally, as she walked towards the back of the palace, she heard a sharp peacock cry. Jiang Ning's footsteps suddenly stopped, and he quickly pressed his ear to the wall, afraid that he might have misheard if he didn't pay attention. At this moment, a clearer peacock cry came from inside, which was very loud and pricked Jiang Ning's ears a bit. She could almost be certain that the peacock was only separated by a wall from herself. Jiang Ning looked up at the red wall in front of her with a smile on her face. Just as she looked up, the smile instantly disappeared from her face. This palace wall is built extremely high and thick to resist assassins and ensure the safety of the Empress. If it weren't for its unique skills, it would never have been easy to climb over this high wall. Jiang Ning, on the other hand, was petite and powerless, making it extremely difficult to climb over the wall and enter. Digging a tunnel is absolutely impossible, and entering through the main entrance is equivalent to rushing to death. Perhaps she looked around and tried to find some tools that could be used for herself from the chaotic bamboo forest. That bamboo is only the thickness of a teacup. It is in spring, and many tender shoots have emerged from the ground, accompanied by a hint of green and astringent greenery in the bamboo forest. Jiang Ning chose a bamboo that looked the thickest and strongest, and it shook violently, causing her to completely bend her waist. Her heart skipped a beat, afraid to think about the consequences of stepping on it. After lingering in this bamboo forest for half a day, Jiang Ning still has no clue. Helpless, she could only choose to consider in the long run. However, Jiang Ning has never been an easy person to give up. After weighing everything in her heart, she still feels that dealing with beauties is much happier than working hard for that dog emperor. So Jiang Ning asked Lu Feng to help him make a palace wall-high ladder, and then dismantled the ladder into a pile of wooden sticks that could be easily assembled. On a dark and windy night, Jiang Ning hugged the pile of ladders that looked like firewood and stepped onto the road to Shuanghua Palace. Along the way, many palace maids and eunuchs cast surprised glances at Jiang Ning. However, these eunuchs and palace maids were already aware of this lady's uniqueness in their hearts, and it was not surprising to walk on the road carrying a pile of firewood at night. After all, the emperor has no objections, what can these servants do? So, Jiang Ning went smoothly and arrived behind the Frost Blossom Palace, holding a ladder in front of everyone. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. I have been waiting for a long time. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 8. Making money for ideals. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The source has no content or has errors. Chapter 9. Hairpin Auction, 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Hairpin Auction, 1. Lu Jinfu looked up at her, his indifferent eyes devoid of any emotion. The steam rising from hot tea covered her eyelashes with a layer of white mist, and her cold gaze softened slightly. Are you going to use the cup you've used for this palace? Glancing at the tea held by Jiang Ning, her gaze was not too disdainful. Then. I'll get another cup, Jiang Ning said as she turned her head and entered the room. No need. Lu Jinfu said nothing more, and Jiang Ning was no longer stubborn, standing quietly beside her. 3 palace attendants were busy in the peacock garden, and those peacocks were suddenly awakened in the late night, as if carrying a great deal of anger, crying and wandering around the garden. Jiang Ning and Lu Jinfu remained relatively silent, without much more words. The warming of her body temperature also brought a strong sense of distress to her. Jiang Ning closed her thick cloak and couldn't bear to yawn. Lu Jinfu lowered her eyelashes and said, "How much can that peacock hairpin be worth? It's worth paying such a big price." There may be some. Jiang Ning pursed her lips and smiled. Actually, I have also thought about whether you would anger me for this, but I always feel in my heart that you are not that kind of person. Lu Jinfu lowered her head and chuckled lightly. You are the legitimate daughter of Jiang Qingyuan. Apart from the emperor, who dares to provoke you in this palace? Jiang Ning was taken aback for a moment. She clearly remembered that not long ago, she almost lost her life due to the peacock incident. And it was this noble woman who demanded strict punishment for herself at the beginning. If Prime Minister Zhang's influence is truly as she said, then why did she cause such a big trouble for a peacock in the beginning? Or does she know her identity? Jiang Ning widened her eyes and was about to continue questioning. Madam. 2 empresses. The eunuch named Xiao Yuanzi presented a pair of peacock feathers with both hands in front of Jiang Ning and Lu Jinfu. The peacock feathers that had just been pulled out. Meng Yin stepped forward, took the peacock feather, and stood beside Lu Jinfu. Jiang Ning looked at the peacock feathers, only to see the slender tail feathers shining brightly in the dim light, emitting a tempting luster. I'm extra careful when pulling out this tail feather, I didn't hurt a peacock. I guarantee you, madam, can have it any time you need it. The eunuch kept nodding and bowing to beg for the reward, but Lu Jinfu coldly ordered, let's go down first. Seeing the young eunuch drooping his head in despair, Jiang Ning quickly grabbed a handful of broken silver and stuffed it into his hand. You go down and share it, it's been hard. The eunuch's eyes lit up, but he timidly turned his head to look at Lu Jinfu, until she nodded and he took the money and stepped down. Mother, this is what my mother gave you. Meng Yin handed the peacock feather to Jiang Ning, then took the teacup and teapot from her hand and turned around to leave. Jiang Ning held the peacock feather in her hand and didn't know what to react to for a moment. She pondered for a moment, suppressed her heartache, and handed the gold ingot she had carried with her in her arms to Lu Jinfu. Lu Jinfu looked impatient and said, do you think our palace is short of this little money? Jiang Ning's mouth twitched, and this casual remark made her feel a bit uneasy. I don't know how to thank the Empress. Lu Jinfu slightly curled his lips, with a hint of cunning in his eyes. Inexplicably, Jiang Ning had an illusion that she had been waiting for this sentence for a long time. From tomorrow on, come to the Frost Blossom Palace to read to our palace. Jiang Ning was taken aback and immediately understood that Lu Jinfu probably just felt that the days in the palace were too boring. She was thinking about her agreement with Mu Jingzhao in her heart, can I come back after 15? Lu Jinfu slightly lifted his chin. I'm leaving, my concubine. Jiang Ning held the peacock feather in his arm and reached out to untie his cloak. Wash it clean before returning it. Jiang Ning no longer insists, bid farewell and leave. She had just turned the corner and saw a lantern shining alone at the entrance of the cold palace. Folding willows carrying lanterns stood quietly at the entrance of the cold palace. She was in a great mood and waved at the willow from a distance, girl, I'm back. Zhouliu ran towards her with a lantern in hand and said, Madam, where did you go at night? You've made me so anxious. Her voice was urgent, with a hint of a strong nasal sound. Jiang Ning was slightly taken aback, carefully examining the face of Zhouliu in front of her. She saw that her eyes were slightly red, and there were still some traces of tears on her face. I just woke up and went to the thatched cottage, thinking to myself that it's cold this day. I was afraid you might get cold while kicking the blanket at night, so I wanted to go to your room and take a look. However, I found no one in the room, and I thought something was wrong with you. Zhouliu spoke incoherently, and the choking in her throat continued to intensify with the sound of her words. The lights illuminated her with sparkling tears at the corners of her eyes. Jiang Ning's heart warmed and he shook the shoulder of the folded willow tightly. Look, isn't this palace okay? I have something important to talk to you about tonight. Zhouliu rubbed her eyes hard and said, no matter how important it is, you can't go out so silently. Okay. Jiang Ning dragged Zhouliu towards the house, lowering her voice and speaking mysteriously. Let me tell you, Zhouliu girl, we've made a lot of money now. As she spoke, she pulled out the peacock feather from her hand and said, look at this bunch, it's enough for us to make a bunch of hairpins. We won't have to worry about food and clothing then, and you'll also have a dowry. Zhouliu's cheeks turned slightly red. She picked up the lantern and looked at the peacock feathers in front of Jiang Ning with the light. Immediately, she widened her eyes and said, Madam. Did you go to the Frost Blossom Palace to steal something? It's not stealing, I'll explain to you later. Jiang Ning stepped into the threshold, broken willow girl. Her expression was mysterious, did you tell someone about my late night outing in the palace? Zhouliu took a sniff and shook her head vigorously. This matter is of great significance, I dare not speak recklessly, she said. Jiang Ning breathed a sigh of relief and casually closed the door of the cold palace. Go to bed quickly, my palace is so sleepy, she said. The next day, Jiang Ning found Zhouliu and Lufeng to work together to twist the hairpin. In fact, it's not difficult to make this peacock feather hairpin, but after all, it's for business and we can't always create a uniform style. Jiang Ning didn't understand the preferences of the nobles in the palace, so he hired Zhilyo as a staff officer. And Lu Feng is responsible for doing some physical work. Zhilyo is preparing the gemstones and emeralds needed for hairpins inside the house, while Jiang Ning and Lu Feng sit around the table in the yard, waiting for Zhilyo. In a state of boredom, Lu Feng took out the blueprint drawn by the folding willow and began to try to twist the hairpin, while Jiang Ning nibbled on melon seeds on the side. Empress. Lu Feng twisted his tweezers hard and looked mysteriously in the direction of the palace door. Now that the peacock feathers are also available, can you sell out a portion? Jiang Ning was chewing melon seeds without stopping. She looked at Lu Feng in front of her and suddenly came up with an excellent idea in her mind. She put down half a handful of melon seeds in her hand and clapped her hands. Do you really want it? Lu Feng nodded like pounding garlic. It depends on your sincerity. Jiang Ning outlined a strange smile at the corner of his mouth. Lu Feng nodded with a sudden realization. I understand. He said as he reached out to touch his own purse. I have money. Madam, how much do you want? I won't give you too much money, and I will keep the silver as a dowry for the willow. Jiang Ning quickly held down his hand searching for silver and said, I just need you to do me a favor. What are you busy with? Lu Feng looked suspicious. In 2 days, the Japanese palace will auction off this peacock feather hairpin at the Cold Palace. You can come and bid. If you can raise the price of this hairpin to 10,000 taels, the palace will give it to you for free. Lu tilted his head as if digesting Jiang Ning's words. After a while, he nodded vigorously and said, It's possible, but what's the point, madam? Jiang Ning was helpless and grabbed the melon seeds again. Seeing Lu Feng's curious expression, she couldn't help but sigh, I have some doubts now. Is it a good decision to hand over the broken willow girl to you? End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Hairpin Auction, 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Hairpin Auction, 2. Lu Feng was taken aback for a moment. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to defend himself, but in the end, he still couldn't say a word. Jiang Ning once again bit open a melon seed shell in his mouth and saw Lu Feng's thick black eyebrows droop, with an indescribable comical expression on his face. Alright, actually what this palace means. Just as Jiang Ning had just uttered 2 words, Zhilyo angrily threw a plate of jutsue at the low table in front of the two. The pearls in the plate jolted violently with the magnitude of the collision, and several pearls slid out from the edges and rolled onto the ground. Jiang Ning shook her hand and threw down the melon seeds on her hand. She watched as Zhilyo moved a chair between the low table and sat down, with a hint of anger hidden on her face. How could you get so angry? Lu Feng had already picked up the pearls on the ground, carefully blowing off the dust on them and putting them on a plate. Speak for yourself. Jiang Ning felt inexplicably guilty. She reached out her right hand and casually poked the bamboo plate, saying, Last night, I climbed over the wall to the palace of Lady Lu and asked for some peacock feathers. What? Lu Feng instantly widened his eyes and looked at Jiang Ning with an incredulous expression. Madam, I know I shouldn't have offended you below, but last time you also saw the temper of Lady Lu. Zhilyo turned her head and spoke excitedly. The blush left by the tear in her eye socket did not completely dissipate, but rather became even redder due to emotional excitement. Jiang Ning casually flicked jutsue in front of her and spoke hesitantly, Actually, I think Consort Lu may not be as aggressive as she looks. Isn't this spicy? Do you know that? Last time, a eunuch broke her leg because she offended her. Not to mention it. As the tone of the folding willow continued to rise, the blush around her eyes also spread to her entire cheeks. As the emotions of the broken willow grew increasingly excited, Lu Feng promptly pressed his hand onto her shoulder and said in a deep voice, Broken willow, this is in the harem. The sharp undulation of the willow's chest seemed to slowly calm down due to the movement of the land breeze. Let's hear what the Empress says. Jiang Ning took a grateful glance at Lu Feng. She picked out beads with her hands and told the two of them about what she had seen and heard last night. The emotions of Zhou gradually calmed down in her narration. She held her cheek in her hand and seemed somewhat incredulous. Are you saying that you went to the Frost Blossom Palace late at night to catch a peacock and was caught by the Empress Dowager? Not only did she not blame you, but she also gave you the peacock feathers. Jiang Ning nodded and added, you also gave me hot tea and a cloak to keep me warm. Conspiracy. Zhou gritted her teeth, this must be a conspiracy. She must be trying to harm you. Jiang Ning held a pearl in her hand and slowly rubbed it with her fingertips. What is there to plan for in this palace? She must be trying to win over Prime Minister Jiang, Zhou said, shaking her head with self-doubt. She must be trying to distance yourself from the emperor. Jiang Ning suddenly felt a bit reluctant to continue this topic. Last night when she was at the Frost Blossom Palace, she vaguely felt something strange, but she couldn't help but figure it out. In that moment, she suddenly realized. That is, she has been squatting in the Frost Blossom Palace for so many days, yet she has never seen the trace of Mu Jingzhao in the Frost Blossom Palace. Even since she had been in the palace for so long, she had never heard of Mu Jingzhao staying in the uterus of any concubine late at night. At first, she thought it was because she was in a cold palace with limited information, but now she has recognized all the palace people in this palace, and she has heard a lot of private chatter from everyone. But she had never heard of the news that Mu Jingzhao favored his consort. I suddenly thought of something in this palace. Jiang Ning tilted his head and carefully pondered his words. Why, I have been in the palace for so long, but I have never heard from the emperor. Which concubine? Zhou was slightly taken aback, and then burst into laughter. And Land Wind, on the other hand, instantly blushed. Madam, your emperor, don't you know him yet? Some difficult reasons arose in Jiang Ning's mind. The scarcity of concubines, lack of children under her knees, and never being favored. All of these intertwine together, and that reason seems to be on the verge of being revealed. Is he? Jiang Ning said with some difficulty, not taking action. Zhou suddenly burst out laughing, gasping for breath. Cough, cough, cough Empress, you really understand how to anger the emperor to death. Lu Feng felt helpless as he patted the back of the folded willow to help her follow it, while explaining to Jiang Ning in a voice as delicate as a mosquito and fly, the emperor has always been diligent in governing and loving the people, not indulging in women. Jiang Ning suddenly felt a bit regretful when she realized that life in the palace was not as scheming as in the storybook. Jiang Ning's gaze swept over Zhutsue, then he grabbed a red agate in his hand and said, "It's really impressive. If it were me, I wouldn't be able to do it." Ha 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 ha. Zhou laughed even louder, so much so that she completely forgot what happened in Jiangning last night. Jiang Ning's cunning plan was successful, so he didn't say much anymore and twisted his hairpin tightly. Three people naturally do things much faster than Jiang Ning alone. In just one morning's work, Jiang Ning and the three of them twisted a bunch of hairpins. Jiang Ning instructed Zhou to find a wooden tray and put the finished hairpin into it. Under the sunshine, the brightly colored jewelry in the unique texture of peacock feathers complement each other, exuding a beauty that combines elegance, luxury, and exotic charm. Even Jiang Ning, a woman who has never loved dressing up, couldn't help but be tempted by it. She casually fiddled with the hairpins in the tray, selected one and handed it to the folding willow. That's it. You can find a nice box to put it in. This is the hairpin that our palace is going to sell tomorrow. Zhou took the hairpin and carefully examined it. Madam has such a good eye. This hairpin is really the most beautiful one among them, she said. Zhou's gaze wandered on the hairpin, with no hidden appreciation or longing in her eyes. She stroked the peacock feathers on the hairpin with some pity, lowered her eyes, let out a soft sigh, and turned around to go to the room to find the box. Just as he took a step out, Zhou turned around and said, "Madam, we've made so much, why are you selling this one?" Jiang Ning smiled and picked up the hairpin from the tray, carefully covering it with a piece of silk cloth. "You'll know tomorrow," he said. "This is also a joke," Zhou murmured in a low voice, then entered the room holding a hairpin. Having prepared the hairpin, Jiang Ning began to prepare for the next steps. For the first time, she changed into a new outfit and put on a light makeup as preparation. Jiang Ning instructed Lu Feng to move the seat she usually used for storytelling to the entrance of the cold palace, and prepared more than twice as much tea and snacks as usual. "Madam, do you think this way of writing is acceptable?" Jiang Ning walked towards the direction of the folding willow upon hearing the sound, and saw the willow lying in front of the table, holding a pen. The red paper on the table read, "Today's storytelling will be held at the main entrance of the cold palace. At the same time, we will not see each other." Jiang Ning tilted her head for a moment, took the pen, and added, "Today we have a heavyweight gift to give to you. Please take a walk and let us know." She picked up the red paper and nodded in satisfaction. "That's it. Your handwriting is really beautiful, madam." Jiang Ning smiled and didn't say a word. With a folded willow, she pasted this piece of paper onto the large hole that used to be used for storytelling. End of this chapter.